Michaela Clark. I would like to thank the Adrian Tinsley program and my wonderful mentor, Dr. Wright, for helping me this summer complete this research project. I would like to warn the audience before I start, some photographs contained in my presentation depict images of torture, just to give you a warning. Because torture is a crime, according to both U.S. and international law, my research this summer has addressed the question: should U.S. personnel be held criminally liable for the alleged torture of enemy combatants? Torture violates federal law and the U.S. Constitution, as well as multiple international laws and treaties. The Bush administration's Office of Legal Counsel and the Department of Defense attempted to legalize torture, and U.S. Army personnel carried out torture against detainees captured in the War on Terror. All of this happened in the name of protecting our nation from a possible future terrorist attack. Dealing with detainees who have possibly harmed Americans and may plan to in the future is difficult. The balance between civil liberties and national security is hard to define. Should the crimes allegedly committed by U.S. personnel, including torture and even murder, be overlooked by our justice system? Should a nation at war abide by their own laws? For my research this summer, I have used a qualitative case study analysis approach. I have reviewed legal documents, I have extensively surveyed governmental documents, and I have reviewed a wide array of national and international treaties, guidelines, and regulations on torture. There are three options that have presented themselves to the new Obama administration as to how to deal with the preceding administration's unlawful acts of torture and other crimes. Many constitutional and human rights organizations are calling for the prosecution of high-level Bush administration officials who authorized torture, as well as those individuals who actually conducted the torture. A second option, a truth commission, has been proposed by Senator Patrick Leahy and Representative John Conyers, both chairs of their respective judiciary committees. A truth commission would require both the perpetrators and victims of the torture that took place under the Bush administration to come forward and tell their side of the story, the whole truth, so that our country can acknowledge the crimes that took place and move on. Consequently, the perpetrators of torture would not be prosecuted or disciplined in any way for their involvement. Truth commissions are most well known from their experience in South Africa at the end of apartheid. The third option, the one that President Obama has chosen thus far, is to ignore the allegations of torture against various officials and move forward with his administration. It is still unclear if criminal liability for the torture committed under the Bush administration will not be pursued. Bush and Cheney are both supporters of this, as well as lawyers from the Office of Legal Counsel who provided the legal opinions for torture, such as John Yoo. President Obama has given Attorney General Eric Holder freedom to decide whether or not to pursue criminal prosecutions. Torture is a crime, but what behaviors constitute torture specifically? In international law, the authoritative definition of torture is any act by which severe pain or suffering, whether physical or mental, is intentionally inflicted on a person for such purposes as obtaining from him information or confession, punishing him for an act he has committed or is suspected of having committed, or intimidating or coercing him. According to U.S. Code, torture is an act committed by a person acting under the color of law specifically intended to inflict severe physical or mental pain or suffering upon another person within his custody or physical control. Both international and U.S. law have stated that torture is both illegal and morally wrong. Is torture reliable and necessary? Confessions obtained through torture are unreliable simply because they could either be true or false. When a suspect is being tortured, they will say anything to make the torture stop. It is clearly nearly impossible for an interrogator to tell the difference between a truth and a lie. The common argument that claims torture is necessary is the hypothetical scenario that a bomb is implanted in a highly populated American city. A terrorist in U.S. custody supposedly knows the location of the bomb, and U.S. authorities need the information. Is it then acceptable to torture the suspect in the hopes he may provide the information needed to dismantle the bomb? Mike Baker, an ex-CIA officer who has been involved in many interrogations over his 16-year career, said he never witnessed anything like the ticking time bomb scenario in his entire career. He also said that an intelligence officer cannot have any confidence in the information gained through torture. The Office of Legal Counsel is responsible for providing legal opinions to the presidential administration. The OLC submitted multiple memos to the Bush administration that gave Defense Department officials a legal backing, or a golden shield, for the enhanced interrogation techniques that they wanted to implement against terrorism detainees. After they had received the legal rationale from the OLC, Defense Department officials, such as former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, authorized the newly legal techniques for use. Illegal techniques that amount to torture, according to the Geneva Conventions and multiple human rights organizations, are listed in the left column. 4 of the OLC-approved enhanced interrogation techniques for use on detainees are listed in the right column. The Bush administration's understanding of what torture is directly contradicts international laws and treaties. According to international law, these techniques are considered torture when used singularly or in conjunction with one another. The Bush administration legalized these techniques for singular use, but reports and interviews have shown that these techniques were used simultaneously on detainees, multiplying exponentially the drastic effects that they have on the body and mind. One of the most critical issues in assessing allegations of torture and determining whether or not a crime has been committed is the need to have credible evidence from multiple sources. Detainee claims of torture have been substantiated by third-party evidence and independent sources. This includes reports from the International Committee of the Red Cross, Amnesty International, Human Rights Center of the University of California, Berkeley, Physicians for Human Rights, and more. Photographs have also been released that have shown torture at the hands of U.S. personnel. Their existence has resulted in criminal prosecutions of torturers. Over 90 videotapes existed that showed the interrogations of multiple detainees by CIA agents. The tapes were illegally destroyed by the CIA, even though a judge ordered that the CIA release the tapes. The CIA is now under investigation and may be criminally prosecuted for the destruction of the tapes. Despite the current debate about prosecution, the U.S. has held torturers accountable when it has been proven by objective evidence that torture has taken place. Abu Ghraib was a prison in Iraq where detainees captured in the War on Terror were held by U.S. forces. Photographs were accidentally leaked to the press and publicized on April 28, 2004, that showed detainees subjected to extreme forms of physical and sexual abuse by U.S. military police and military intelligence officers. This picture became one of the most publicized worldwide, depicting Americans torturing Arabs. It shows an Arab man forced to stand on a box with a cape on and a hood on his head. He has electrical wires attached to him. Specialist Sabrina Harmon, who was convicted and sentenced to 6 months in prison, said of this picture that it was her job to keep detainees awake. Harmon allegedly threatened the detainee with electrocution if he stepped off the box as a method of keeping him awake. This picture shows Private Lindy England holding the chain attached to a collar wrapped around the neck of a naked Arab detainee. Private England was sentenced to 3 years in prison and received a dishonorable discharge from the Army. This is one example of the psychological and sexual humiliation the detainees were forced to endure at Abu Ghraib prison at the hands of U.S. personnel. Though the government authorized multiple interrogation techniques that constituted torture, there were many other abuses that also took place, such as sexual assault and using army dogs to intimidate and attack prisoners. One detainee died at Abu Ghraib during interrogations. Manadel al-Jamadi was captured on the night of November 3, 2003, by a Navy SEAL team and the CIA. He was struck in the head with the rifle butts of the Navy SEALs at a military base and beaten severely, receiving many broken ribs. After being turned over to the CIA's custody at Abu Ghraib, al-Jamadi was shackled to a window with his hands behind his back while being interrogated. This is where he died. His body was packed in ice and an IV was inserted to make him look like a patient. Though the CIA had interrogated him at Abu Ghraib, there was no record of him being on the detainee roster at the prison, as they had circumvented normal admittance requirements. Navy SEAL Lieutenant Andrew Ledford remains the only person to be prosecuted in the al-Jamadi case for allowing his subordinates to beat al-Jamadi. Ledford's court-martial ended with an acquittal. However, the prosecution of Ledford for the murder of al-Jamadi, a terrorism detainee, shows that criminal consequences for torture has and should occur. A report by General Antonio Taguba was issued that reported U.S. personnel that should be held responsible for the abuse that took place at Abu Ghraib. Out of the 9 people that received criminal sentences for the abuse, Specialist Charles Grainer received the longest prison sentence, 9 years. Out of the 4 people who faced only disciplinary action for the abuse, Colonel Thomas Pappas was relieved of command and fined. Because personnel who directly committed the torture have been criminally prosecuted, the question remains, how far up the chain of command does criminal responsibility lie? Should former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, who authorized the methods amounting to torture, be prosecuted? During my research this summer, I have been examining 3 case studies of detainees who claim to have been tortured by U.S. personnel. The first is Abu Zubaydah, a committed terrorist who was involved with al-Qaeda. He was captured on March 28, 2002, and has been in U.S. custody ever since. He was the coordinator of a training camp of extreme jihadists in Afghanistan. In multiple interviews with human rights organizations, such as the International Committee of the Red Cross, Zubaydah described how he was tortured. Waterboarding, prolonged nudity, stress positions, and sleep deprivation are just a few of the methods that were used on Zubaydah. He continues to be held at Guantanamo Bay, though he has never been formally charged with a crime. No U.S. personnel have been held accountable for the torture of Zubaydah. The following 2 case studies I am still reviewing and will continue to examine throughout the rest of the summer. Maher Arar, a Canadian citizen, was falsely accused of having terrorist ties and was put on the U.S. terrorist watch list. He was detained by U.S. authorities in New York and rendered to Syria, where he was tortured. After a year in an underground prison in Syria, Arar was released. He was compensated by the Canadian government for allowing him to be transferred to the U.S. The Canadian government issued a full report on Arar's case and made a public apology. Arar sued the U.S. government for falsely detaining him. The government dismissed the case on the grounds that it violated national security concerns to investigate Arar's claims. Even though Arar has been proven innocent, the U.S. government has not faced any consequences for their misguided claims against him and the torture that resulted. Lastly, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is the highest-ranking al-Qaeda official ever captured. He is the self-proclaimed mastermind of the 9/11 attacks. In front of a military tribunal, he also admitted responsibility for any other terrorist attacks and/or plans around the world. He was convicted of war crimes and has been held at Guantanamo Bay for nearly 3 years. According to an interview with KSM by the International Committee of the Red Cross, he has been tortured since being held at Guantanamo Bay. He was waterboarded, beaten severely, and had cold water poured on him, among other methods. Once again, even though government documents and human rights reports confirm his testimony, no one has been held criminally responsible for his torture. If the identities of the interrogators who committed torture can be uncovered, I believe that based on the evidence provided by detainees, human rights organizations, and government documents, criminal prosecutions should commence against them. U.S. officials under the Bush administration who authorized the torture should also be criminally prosecuted. The responsibility stretches the entire length of the chain of command, from the individual military police who committed torture at Abu Ghraib, all the way to Donald Rumsfeld at the Department of Defense who authorized their actions. Though large amounts of torture have taken place, only a few torturers have been brought to justice. However, the fact remains, torture has been prosecuted in the U.S., and future prosecutions should take place to ensure that this crime does not go unnoticed. By prosecuting those who have both committed and authorized torture, the United States government is affirming its foundational beliefs and sending a message to the world. Torture is wrong and unacceptable. It also would affirm that in our country, no one is above the law, even government officials who torture in the name of justice.